Hey folks, this is Doug with ServiceNow. I'm in the ITOM business unit, and as many of you know, I've got a video out there when we use probes and sensors to classify a very simple SNMP classifier that found IP video cameras, IP-enabled video cameras, and it's been around a while. And knowing that we are going to patterns at ServiceNow, I wanted to be able to change it up and give you some insight on how to create a pattern for a simple SNMP classifier and go through many of the same steps, if not a few extras. We know that ServiceNow is focusing development on pattern development. Probes and sensors, while aren't going anywhere, they definitely aren't going to be the focus of any new features and functionality, and that's all again going to be in patterns. So let's, without further ado, we're going to follow a lot of the same steps that we did here in this SNMP classifier. So you may see a lot of the same things here in the beginning, but when we get into the actual pattern and extending SNMP MIBs, I think you're going to be able to find a lot of cool new things that you can do if you haven't done them already. Alright, so as we know, the first thing we want to do is be able to do a quick discovery against an IP address. Now, as our story goes, the folks on the network team aren't seeing, in this case, a LAN Accelerator. This is a Riverbed LAN Accelerator in their CMDB, and they need us, discovery admins, to bring these in. And that's where our work is going to happen here. As we look at the ECCQ and we go through the process of discovery, we watch our phases go. We did our port scan. We saw we got an SNMP response, and we know that because we got a response. We triggered that SNMP classify. This device clearly also has port 22 open, so we tried to SSH to it to no avail. Obviously, we don't have credentials, SSH credentials to it. So just like our first video, we're going to go off the SNMP classify probe to be able to pull in the important information to help us get moving. Now, as we might remember, we're going to be using a lot of this information here, specifically around the system information. So as I expand this and go sysdesker, we see a lot of the system OID information. And the one that we all know and love and that we've looked to in the past was this SNMP system OID. For reference, as many of us know, in probes and sensors, we can classify a device primarily based on 4 criteria. Does it route, print, switch, or power? That's done in the SNMP classify probe and sensor. Once we determine that, we can follow it through to a different classification type. We do have this backup method of utilizing the SNMP sys object OID to be able to say, wait a minute, even if this device doesn't tell me if it can route, print, switch, or power, I'm going to call its classification based on this value. Now, this value is used because it actually is supposed to be truly unique for every manufacturer and model. Some companies do a really good job in building out a response for that OID for every device that they create and sell out there to the public. Some just like to containerize and keep them all to one device, to one number to many devices. Like HP printers is my favorite example. Is they have one SysOID for 12 different models of the same printer family. So it can get a little bit confusing in some cases, but if you get this ID back, it's pretty sure that it's valid, and we're going to use this in our classification just like we did for the IP camera. So our first order of business is understanding we have a LAN Accelerator. Now, ServiceNow, do you guys have a table at home out of the box that has LAN accelerators? So, the simplest and easiest thing is just come right here and type WAN, and there it is. I've got LAN Accelerator table. Do I have IP cameras? I don't, right? So if you just count on the application bar here, seeing that you have a LAN Accelerator, that's great information. But sometimes you want to either use a CI class manager, or been around a while, you might go to tables and columns, which will go here. Now, tables and columns is a way for us to see all the tables. Now, we've already validated that we had WAN in our application bar here, but I'm going to actually look for WAN myself, and there it is. So let's just say somebody forgot to put it in the application bar here in the configuration, I can quickly see we have a LAN Accelerator. Now, in our previous movie, I actually extended a table to put those cameras in. Same advice follows if you want to watch that again, if you do have to extend a table to be able to achieve your goals. Again, you can do this through the table and columns. You can do it through the CI Class Manager now. Any will work. So if we want to take a quick look at these tables, I see my LAN Accelerator table extends off netware, extends off hardware, so everything there is aligned with discovery and how we bring things in. So hey, thank you ServiceNow, you got a home for me. Now all I have to do is just build the classification pieces to start filling that table with the appropriate devices. So as we look forward, I know I have my response, so I know my table that it's going to go in, and now I just need to set up my classifier. I like setting up the classifier first because the other pre-components need that classifier to be in there. So we're going to go down to SNMP CI Classification under Discovery Definition, just like we did the IP camera one, and we're going to create a new classifier. And we'll just call this generically LAN Accelerator. And our table, which we know exists, beautiful. Remember, classifiers don't care about manufacturer model, so we're just going to leave that blank and we're going to click Save. Excellent. Now we've got our classifier. Now I need to be able to call this classifier. Again, this device doesn't tell us if it routes, prints, switches, or powers. It does something unique. So I want to build my SNMP system OID to be able to call this classifier specifically. Now, they did a nice thing for us here. They added it to a related list, so I can click New here if I wanted to and just add it and tie it to this LAN Accelerator class. But let's take a look at the bigger picture. Now, as we know, each of these OIDs, and as I mentioned, they're supposed to be absolutely unique for everything manufacturer and model. Now, in probes and sensors, we absolutely needed this information here under the manufacturer model because that's how we set it, right? If we saw this SNMP SysOID 26C6 come in, we're going to say, hey, you're a standard network switch. You're going in the switch table. You're going to use the standard network switch classifier, excuse me. You're going in the switch table. We're going to set your manufacturer to this value and your model to that value. Now, you could still do this, even with patterns. But the thing is that we can do this inside the pattern as well. So I'm going to do that in this case. I'm going to keep the manufacturer model blank here, but I'm going to actually use the pattern to actually set those variables for us, those values for us. So first thing we want when we click a new record is the OID. Now we can see this OID right here. And that's our return, this value, right? Here's our question for anybody that's curious. It's object OID.2 and our return of the answer. So I'm going to copy that value and we're going to go back to this. So OID, that OID, leave off the leading dot. I'm not going to set a manufacturer. I'm not going to set a model because I'm going to do that in the pattern. But I could if I wanted to. Remember, you could if you wanted to and not have to deal with it in pattern. Your choice. And we know this is going to be a LAN Accelerator, and we know the classifier we want to use. Alright, and we're going to submit that. Now, we could set this. We can even use, maybe it'd be handy just to have the manufacturer in there, Riverbed. But again, I just want to leave this blank for you so we can get a good idea of how to do this completely in a pattern. But the option's yours for sure. Alright, so now I've got my SNMP system OID, I have my classifier, and now I know I'm going against Riverbed devices. So we could do a couple of things here. Now we need to prep the land, so to speak. We need to get things ready. There's a lot of different angles we need to deal with. In my example here, I'm going to be dealing with loading new custom MIBs for this type of device because I'm going to get some very specific questions out of it. So I'm not only going to create a shell of a device, but I'm going to give it some meat to its bones with things like its version, um, its actual serial number, those sorts of things. Because what I found in doing this riverbed device did not reply with this general MIB2 serial number question. So we had no idea what its serial number was, and it was tucked away in the private MIB, which we'll get into as a separate conversation. So I want to load up MIBs now. And we do that very simply in the MIB server application. Alright, so I'm going to load up some MIBs for this device. Now, as we look in our SNMP MIBs in our MIB server application, we see we ship with probably 60 plus or so different types of public and private MIBs. Now, for those of us that are aware about how MIBs work, and some of us out there that may not be as familiar, there are two primary types of MIBs. There's a public MIB, such as, say, this entity MIB, that all vendors that talk SNMP agreed upon, according to internet law, that says if you ask me the same questions, I'll answer it the same way. Such as you can imagine a router and a switch company. Both of them have CPUs, both of them have memory, both of them have interfaces. So it makes sense to have a generic or a standard question that you can ask either of those devices. Tell me about your CPU, and they'll give you the same answer. And that goes across many, many different queries and different types of public MIBs that are out there. Now, sometimes vendors present unique capabilities that their devices do that others do not, while still talking SNMP. Imagine our switch company and our router company. Imagine the switch company comes out with the coffee maker attachment to their switches. You can plug a coffee maker in and get values back from that type of device to learn about it, because that's their unique capability. So our switch company would publish a private MIB for their coffee maker that connects to their switch. Now, I can load up that coffee maker MIB and ask that switch about water, how much water is in it, what type of grounds it uses. You know, I'm being a little silly just for conversation's sake. But each vendor has unique capabilities that others do not. So they need to publish these private MIBs to answer these questions. So if I were to ask that router company about its coffee maker grounds, it would reject and say, I don't know what you're talking about. I don't have an answer for that. Right? So in this case, while this device, this WAN accelerator, is a riverbed WAN accelerator, does answer some of the generic global public questions, I found quickly that it does not really load up all of them. So I needed to find their private MIBs, download them. Now, I highly recommend, first and foremost, going to your vendors. Get them from their support. There are some very positive, good third-party websites out there that load up tons of MIBs. I use them all the time. But there are some nefarious bad ones out there that try to give you bad files. So you want to be very, very careful with where you get your information from. I've never heard of an exploit to a MIB, but keep it from a trusted source. So in my case, I went to Radware directly and I downloaded their MIBs to save us some time in the research I had to do. But obviously, Google, the other half of our brains, all you have to do is look for what you need. So here I'm going to click New, and I'm going to call this the Riverbed MIB, a Steelhead MIB. And I could set the version. This is all just for our information, right? The URL that I found it. And for Riverbed WAN accelerators. Alright, so now I attach the MIB. and submit. Now, one thing to remember is make sure your MIB does not have an extension, whether it be .mib, .txt. You want to load the record with just the file name, no extensions. Okay, keep that in mind because it is important. So unlike credentials, where if I were to add a new credential, modify a credential, remove a credential, the platform tells the MIB server immediately through an ECCQ entry that says reload your credentials. I've just made a change to that table. It does not do that with MIBs. So the MIB server is only collect and compile the MIBs on startup. So we have to go to our MIB servers and actually restart them. So we're going to do that here. And we're going to pause as we wait for this to come back up. Okay, our MIB server has come back up, and I'm going to give it a few seconds here. Let it do its startup routines. Let it check all the ACLs, make sure it authenticates the instance, download those credentials, and start compiling and doing what it needs to do as it does when it normally starts up. Now, first thing I want to do after it comes back up and I've waited my few seconds is I want to go look at those logs. Every time you load a new MIB, you always want to check the agent log to be sure that the MIBs got compiled correctly. So let's take a look at that, and it's a payload, so we'll let that download. Shouldn't be too big, hopefully. Alright. So here's our payload. Let's go on down to the bottom, most recent. Uh-oh. Yep. First thing caught my eye, non-object identifier. What's the problem here? And we look, MIB loading errors, couldn't reference MIB RBT-MIB. Alright, so now this error was on purpose. I wanted you to see this because this is very important, and it will get you if you don't do MIBs every day, every week, every month, but randomly. Always remember there are some MIBs out there that have parent MIBs that are kind of my best example or just description of it is it's kind of the instructions of how to read all the other MIBs. So if we see that we're missing it and it couldn't load that MIB I just did. Now those that were keen of eye saw that I had that RBT MIB already queued up waiting to go because I wanted you to see the error. But if we look at this Steelhead MIB that we loaded, we can even see the very top part. It's saying, hey, I'm going to need this MIB as well before I can load. Okay, so it even told us ahead of time, but I just wanted to see that error because if you think you've just got the one MIB, you may need a backup MIB to support that. So here we're just going to go back to our SNMP MIBs. We're going to load that one. We'll call this the riverbed because that's ultimately the parent. Version 1, URL, and parent MIB. And of course we attach. No extensions. Submit that and do the restart dance once again. Alright, our MIB server has come back up. Again, we're waiting a few seconds, half a minute. Let it do its thing in its startup processes. And we're going to grab the MIB logs again. Here's that agent log coming back pretty quick, which is great to see. Saves us a lot of time. As soon as that downloads, we'll be opening it. And again, we're looking for a good compile so we know it's available to be used. For those of us that do know, some of us that don't know, MIBs you can consider are books of questions. Questions being OIDs or queries that we can make against a target through SNMP to pull back critical information that we need to use, we need to consume. So whenever you look at a MIB, think of it as a book, and inside that book are a whole bunch of OIDs that get looked up upon, so we know what we're going after in regards to data coming back. And we look at this. Oh man, that looks good, doesn't it? And we even see extended MIBs loaded, no errors. Everything should work as designed. Great news. Alright, so we've got everything set up basically for us to start our pattern. We've got our private MIBs loaded, so we can ask unique questions of our device to pull back things we may want to know. We've got our SNMP system OID set to call our custom SNMP classifier. Alright, we've got our SNMP system OID ready to go to call that classifier. We've got our classifier built using the appropriate table that already existed out of box. Again, look to our original video to talk about extending tables. And we are ready to go. Now, we could make this just easy on ourselves and go the old movie route and just put in the SNMP identity probe, and we'll create a record, and it will be the end of the day. You can extend it as you wish. But we're going to take that extra step and actually build a new pattern to include that into our classifier. So we not only get basic information, but even more extended information. Alright, now let's create our new pattern. And if we look for discovery patterns, we have these right here. And the first thing we want to do is click new, obviously. Pattern designer opens, and we determine our pattern type. Obviously infrastructure. We're not doing applications like in our process classifiers. We're doing infrastructure. The CI type, we already have our table, LAN Accelerator, and we'll call this LAN. Okay, something very simple. Okay, name it to your obviously terminologies within your environment. So we have to create a new identification section. We'll call this discovery, just like all the other patterns. And remember, look to existing patterns that we have out there. They're great examples, just like probes and sensors. If you're looking to do something, it was probably already done in another pattern. Use those as a guide and as an example. Hopefully this will help give you some direction, but remember, always look to what comes out of box, because there's a lot of great stuff that's already been done that you might be able to reuse. Alright, and we'll save this. Now, this is going to get a little bit tricky part in setting up this pattern so we can really start building it out. There's a couple of things we need to do in defining this pattern. First thing I want to do is come into Discovery, and we're going to go into the Pattern Designer, and I need to add some related lists here. These are where our related lists are in our class that we're going to be populating. Now, I learned through doing this, you need more than one related list in this thing for data to come in, which was interesting. So in my practice, I know I'm always going to be using a network card. My network adapter, I'm going to add that network adapter to that list, and I'm going to also add IP addresses. Add that. Okay. Now this is where this gets interesting. So this just basically added to a particular table called the CI to pattern list. These have some different rules that deal with the data that's going in for this class. Okay, so whatever you add here, you've got to remember to go back to a different table and modify it so it does what you want it to do. So we're going to go back to our primary application here. We're going to step out of the Pattern Designer, And the table, while not exposed in our applications, it is located at SACI2 pattern.list. SA_CI_2_pattern.list. And here we are. And we see that these different types of devices, this pattern is now using what I just added. And this contains that deletion strategy. Now, as we see in our other examples, we got a whole bunch here. So we say, let's look at, what's a good one here? Load balancers, right? Let's look at the F5 load balancer. We see that its CI DNS name network adapter, they're setting that to absent. But out of box, the default is keep. So we're just going to go in and modify our deletion strategy to just mark as absent so it stays along with what everybody else is doing. Not delete, keep. There we go. So I can now modify the data that comes into that table. If it's there on one run but it's not there on the next run, it doesn't delete the record if I so chose. It will just mark it as absent in case it does come back. Now you can choose to delete it. That's not a problem whatsoever. But usually I just like to keep in trend with what other CIs, what other network CIs are doing, and that is mark as absent. So remember that related CI types. When I add to this list here in my new pattern, I've got to jump back over to this table here and then set my deletion strategy. Now I could do this the inverse. I could add a new related CI type to my pattern, right? I can do that from this direction, but I still have to come back and change this deletion strategy at this level. Okay, so either way, don't forget to do this step when you add these related lists to your devices. And again, that is SACI2 pattern.list. All right, now one other thing I also want to set up my pattern for is utilizing pre and post processing scripts. Now those are shown up here, and we see that under the pattern designer. Now, as we all know, we're going to patterns because it should be making it a little bit easier for us to not have to deal with so much JavaScript and sensor processing. The probe goes out and asks the question, the sensor brought back the data, and the data came back and the sensor processed it and put it into the CMDB. Now, it doesn't mean that sensors are completely gone away. They are still here, as you see with these 30 examples. In our pre and post scripts, we actually modify the data depending on where you need it edited in dealing with data that's either coming back. You can manipulate the data before it gets processed, after it gets processed. You can look at all the examples that we have here, but we need to add our LAN Accelerator pattern to these because there's processing needed in our pattern that only comes from these types of devices. Now this is going to be a little hunt for you to understand, and maybe some trial and error to see which one you actually need. We can look in here and see what it does to see if it's going to be something I need to deal with. In this case, I know it is because down here it deals with the manufacturer and model. Now we remember that I decided to deal with manufacturer and model in the pattern as opposed to putting it in the SNMP CISO ID table. So this is going to be able to manage the lookup of the name attribute of the manufacturer model and put it into the core company table by its SysID. So it's important, right? We don't want 20 different riverbed manufacturers. We just want the one. So knowing this, I have to come up here and I see in this script that it's setting my network types. Now I've also been messing around with some other things here, but I'm going to add my LAN Accelerator to this. It's comma separated, CMDB _CI _WAN ACCEL and network, I believe it is. Let's double check that. Or can I double check that again? I'm sure that's it. And then we're going to click here, and I'll double check it once we get out of here. So we'll go LAN Accelerator. So I got to add my pattern to this. Unfortunately, it doesn't inherit. So it'd be great if it would just, network gear, primary table, and then anything below it. But unfortunately, we have to call it specifically by the pattern, and then modify the script to include our table that we want to that also want to be affected by this. So we'll update that. Now there's these other ones that you can use. That's the only one I'm going to deal with. This loads up, actually this pre-launch actually loads up all kinds of different properties. So this is a pretty cool one, even though I'm not using it in this example. If I were to create a custom pattern, I can tell it to load up all my networking properties that I have in sys properties, or as we live and breathe in, normal discovery, definition properties. So I can have these attributes available in my pattern. Let's have some fun, and we'll add it just so you can see it. But I'm not going to use them, but I'm going to have them there just in case we want to do that. Okay, we'll update those. All right, so now there's a few other ones in here. SNMP host pre-launch. This sets for name values. It just says, hey, I'll set this property if you want it. Again, very similar. We'll add it just because we can. And maybe it's a good thing to keep it all consistent. Even after changing your, adding your pattern, just saying, hey, everything network, I'm going to add my pattern to it. But those are the ones we're going to add. So if we go tables, I just want to double check that LAN Accelerator class, make sure I got it absolutely right. Come on. CMDB, CI, WAN, Excel, network. Okay, cool. I got that right. All right. So now we're ready to go. We've added our CI types related to this pattern, and now we're going to start collecting data. Now, if you've already been running through a few patterns yourself and you just know how to set your standard ones, that'll work great, and you can start adding values. Like this one here, I'm going to actually use the SNMP, the library that exists that you'd find in other router and switch patterns that come out of box. I'm going to use an existing library, and that's the SNMP Identify. SNMP Identify. And we'll name this. Okay. And we see there's a whole bunch of steps here. What I'm doing this for is so I can get the network interface cards. Now I could build out all of these steps, maybe a partial number of these steps to do what I needed to do the same thing, right? Just specifically for my pattern, but why recreate the wheel if we already have a library that does this for us? Remember, just like probes and sensors, when they're shared across classes, if I make any changes to this library, that change is going to happen on all other classes. All other patterns this library is applied to. So be careful when modifying the library steps itself. The name doesn't matter what I did here, but it's the actual steps that are going to be key. All right, so I know I'm going to quickly add that, and then I want to do something about the name. So I'm going to get the name, and I'm going to create another step, get the name of the device, and that's going to be an SNMP query. All right, and we know what query I'm going to make pretty easily because I already have it. Right? If we go back to our SNMP Classify input from our test discovery, all I have to do is look for name, and that's down here in the system OID, and we saw what it came back. All right, cool, you're giving me back a name. And I'm going to grab that question here's our question. Oh, no, excuse me. Here's our question. The .5. That's a public query. And we'll do that and set that to sysname. Oh, looks like somebody's been doing this already. Alright, so I'm going to set that name. And what I want to do is I want to start testing this. Right? Okay, it's great. I can start throwing steps in because I've done this 48 times getting ready to do this video. But I want to just test it on my own. So we're going to go into debug. Now debug basically runs the pattern as we write it. So I'm going to grab this IP address of my device and I'm going to drop that bad boy in there. Click OK. A little bit of paint drying. One thing I learned through this process is the steps are great. Patterns are fun to use because you get a lot of that immediate feedback from the queries. But you still need to know your JavaScripting in case you do need to write any of those pre-post processing scripts. There are JavaScript and eval statements. If you've been doing service mapping for a while, you may need to rely on that skill set as well. But building a generic or very simple pattern like this, I think pretty much anybody can do. So we see we've loaded this up. And look at things that we've also, I wanted to roll down here and show you is now we're starting to load things. Remember those pre and post processing scripts that looked into the interfaces and set our SNMP trusted values, right? They started populating now that this is an active, in a sense, active pattern. It uses that back and forth. So we get sysname, and now I'm gonna add another step. And we're actually going to set the name of the device. Pretty much a primary key to setting these values, to building this device, building this record. Okay, so the first thing we're going to do is we're going to come down here to sysname, and we see that's been populated. I'm going to bring that right there, and I'm just going to put that value there. So really simple as a drag and drop, right? Unlike a sensor where I would head, okay, result of sysname, set current dot name to result of sysname, right? I just did a drag and drop here, which is pretty handy. So we're going to say set sysname. All right. So after this step, now remember this step only works after you've passed it. So I'm going to set another step afterwards. I've got my name. And we see name has now been populated there on my primary record. So now I want to actually get the model information. So I'm going to get name, manufacturer, model. Remember, we're going to do this in the pattern. So we're going to get model. And that's an SNMP query. Now this is really handy. This is a really cool part of the pattern designer I like. For those of us that have been doing probes and sensors for since horse-drawn discovery days, we would love to have this when building out probes and sensors around SNMP. We actually have a MIB browser built in, so you don't have to rely so much on your heavy Googling figuring out what question do I want to ask of this device. What is the right OID? And if I find the right OID, what book of questions is it in? So all I have to do is come down here and find my steelhead MIB that we loaded just not too long ago. And now take a look at this. It'll actually allow us to browse the MIB tree to find what data is available for us to set as an attribute on our primary record. Now we're doing simple stuff here, but you can see here's a system. I get model, serial number, version. I can look into the active configs, any alarms if that's important, statistics if you want those as attributes. Each MIB will have different sets of queries, but this browser really allows us to do some cool things and pull back and see what gets pulled back. So there we see I just told it to do a query, a model, and there's my model. So that's my OID. That's the question I want to ask. And we're going to do that. We're going to click done here, and that's model. Done. Now what I want to do, as model comes in, we saw the result. I'm clicking test here. So we'll get the result back here. And we see it came in two kind of forms. Just the value and the value within a parens. So this is the good model, talking to my friends out there who wanted this done. They said that's the model we want. This is just like the base one. This is what we actually want. So that's fantastic. All I got to do is just manipulate that data before I set it. So here we're going to parse a variable, and our variable is our model. And we'll pull that back. And we'll call this new model. And my delimiters are going to be my parens. Add, close paren, add, done, take position 1. Oop, position 2. Oop, did I mess up my limiters? Let's remove one of those. Let's remove that. I think I had to do it this way. Huh? There we go. Alright, so we got position 2. That's my information. That's what I wanted. I'm going to set that to a variable called new model. Now I'm going to set my manufacturer. So we'll do this. We'll go parse model. And we'll go to new step. Now we're going to set it. And we're going to set that parameter name value. And it's going to be new model is model. Scroll on down here. Alright, so and we'll set model here. Now I want to set manufacturer. Now I've saved us some time here. Manufacturer is not located anywhere in that private MIB. And we see we got our model ID there. Alright, so manufacturer is not anywhere in that private MIB. But I know this is a Riverbed LAN Accelerator. So I can just hard set that parameter for manufacturer, because I know this is the only device I'm going to be doing here. Excuse me. X. We're going to set Riverbed. Okay, so I'm going to hard set Riverbed as my manufacturer, just because I know this is the device, and I know this is the only one they have, and only my SNMP system OID is going to know it. So this is pretty functional for this use case. You may need to do some other work. Look at other MIBs that a vendor may have if you absolutely don't have this confidence. But here we do, so I can just hard set it. Alright. Now, as I mentioned earlier in the video, this device does not answer the standard serial number questions that our public MIB is asking. So thankfully this private MIB does have the answer for us. And our manufacturers popped in along with our model. Alright, so I'm going to do another SNMP query here. And we're going to choose our MIB. And if we remember from our steelhead, our system serial number. Get that data just to validate. There it is. So now we've got a 100% gold serial number for that device. And there it pops it in. Okay. Excellent. So now I've got get serial number. And now I'm going to set serial number. Well, oh, wait a minute. Almost forgot. Sorry. We're going to be doing something pretty interesting here. It's because I'm not only just going to set the serial number as the attribute, but I'm going to add it to a related list of the CMDB serial number table. So right now I have an attribute of serial number, as we have right here. I have an attribute, but I have to put that into a table so I can merge two different tables. I can't insert an attribute into a table. I can only bring two tables together. So what I'm going to do is parse a variable here. Where's my parse variable? Parse variable. And my variable is going to be my serial number. Retrieve. And then I'm going to do a table. And we'll call this temp serial. And then serial number. Now, this value serial number I'm actually using be the same as what's in the serial number table, and that's going to help us align these two values. So I'm taking an attribute, creating a table out of it, and then we're going to set our serial number tables inside of a merge. Okay, so we needed to set this ahead of time. So we'll just do position 1. And we'll create temp serial. Alright. And now we're going to set the serial number attribute. Now I'm going to set that attribute. Again, this is just a step that we're going to use later, basically. So we're going to go set serial number. Now let's set a parameter value. And then we already have our serial number. We don't have to mess with that table. We're doing our own thing here. And then we're going to put serial number here. So one thing you do notice, if you're not familiar with patterns, these are actually the identifiers that this is going to be looking for in building this piece out. So if you're curious what are going to absolutely need to be in here, you could look for these keys. We've got name, and now we're setting serial number. So we're working ourselves out okay. Alright. So now we're going to transform our serial number table, our temp serial number table, because I want to get that in there. Beautiful. Now we're going to set our temp serial number table into the proper serial number table. So here we'll go transform table. Our source is our temp serial table. And there's our temp serial table. Oh, terp, sorry, misspelled there. And our target is CMDB underscore serial underscore number. And our field name is going to be serial number. Remember, we named it the same. And our value is serial number. And then we're going to do serial number type. And we're going to hard code this standard serial number. And one more. Do is it valid? Value is true. I found it on the device. All right. Okay, so we're going to say merge temp serial. Okay, excellent. And now we're going to get our system version. So I'm going to set another step here. And it's going to be SNMP query. Browse again. Steelhead mid. System version. Just click there, and that pulls that in. So all I did, that's kind of cool. Just click that value, just click, and be done, and it populates it. Excellent. And we can even test that and see what comes back. Excellent. System version. There's that big long string. Excellent. So we're going to set that in the system version. So we'll set that. We'll say get. And now we need to set that value. All right. So as we see here, here's all the attributes that are available on this class. We won't go through the actual task of creating a new attribute for just this value. Everybody knows how to do that. So we use something out of the box just to make the video easy, and we use firmware version to hold that variable. So we'll set our parameter value. Now we're going to put this whole string in there, system version, and we're going to drop it all into firmware version. So we see it's a pretty long string, but maybe their admins can read that like it's primary school math. You can trim it up depending on what they need, but for right now we'll just drop the whole thing in the table. And we're going to set our IP address. Important to have your IP address on your record. Again, very easy step. You notice these last few ones, I'm not having to write any sensor JavaScript, which is pretty handy. Makes it a little bit easier, but I am doing very simple, very basic things. So we'll go set IP address. Now I can get IP address from down here in my computer system. And there's its management IP. So I'm going to set parameter value again. Very easy. Computer system management IP. Set it to IP address. Drag and drop. Makes life easy, doesn't it? Alright. Let's add another step. Pardon me. So here we have it. I'm going to pause real quick here. So here we have our device back. We've got our IP address now. We got our name, got our serial number, firmware version. Everything's starting to be built out. Now, important thing to remember is that when it comes to patterns, unlike probes and sensors, we actually build references and relationships between tabled items. such as our serial number, where we had to create a temp serial number table just so we can insert it into the CMDB serial number piece. And that's important for us because that's how it keeps your CMDB in order. We did not have to do this with probes and sensors because we just relied on correlation IDs saying, hey, you existed here, you're tied to that. Now we need to build actual references and relationships. So first one we're going to deal with is the serial number in the serial number table to the actual parent CI. So here we're going to call the parent table CMDB underscore serial number. It actually exists. All right, and my child is my primary class. CMDB underscore WAN. Okay, and the result table is just kind of going to be a temp table. Serial to WAN. Okay, it's never going to mean anything, so it's just a holding, something to hold it in. And our relation type is none because we're going to build a reference here. And it's going to be a parent to child, and we want to look in the configuration item. Column name. Okay. And then we want to set a condition when this happens. When 1 equals 1. I don't know why, but you just got to do it. And we're going to remove anything that's unmatched. So if I get a new serial number, we're going to remove those pieces. Alright. Now, I need to deal with the network adapter. So let's do create reference to serial number to WAN. Alright, now I got to deal with this in my network card. Create relation reference. My parent table is my WAN Accelerator. Now, I've done these based off of existing patterns. I saw how existing patterns deal with it, and I pretty much copy pasted. For those who've known me for a little bit, know that I'm a proud copy paste programmer. So I'm using a lot of examples from other patterns and just some trial and error as well. And here I'm going to go to network adapter. And then we're going to, again, just that temporary holding table. Network adapter Excel. Just make it readable, meaning enough for you. So our relationship is going to, and this is going to be a relationship between the two. Owns by owns. And this is going to be a reference. And then it's going to be child to parent. And our column name again, CMDB underscore CI. And our condition is always true. If 1 equals 1, remove anything that's not matched. Okay. Reference network. Okay. And now I need to build a relationship between my IP address and my device. That's a relationship. Again, it helps sync everything up. Make sure you've got one IP to one device. All right. And this will be our last step. So we're going to do create relationship reference. Parent table is our WAN Accelerator. Our child table is IP address. Result table are holding IP LAN Accelerator. Our relationship type is owned by, and when it's always true, remove. Create a relationship IP to WAN. And then what we're going to do, that should be good. And let me check one other thing here. All right. And we just do check one other thing here, make sure everything's running as expected. Remember, debug is different than actual discovery. While it may work here, sometimes discovery may have a little bit of a problem, but this will give you a good idea of what you have coming in. And we see our network adapters here, all primaries. It's beautiful. Excellent. All right, so we're going to save our record and we're going to publish it. Anybody familiar with patterns? So you got to publish it. Mid servers will reload them. And we can close these out. I'm going to leave my debug. I'm going to leave this little session on here. But we're going to come back over to here. Now I've got my pattern built. I've added it to my necessary pre-post processing scripts. Now I'm actually going to go into being able to call that pattern in my classifier. So we're going to look at SNMP, go back to our WAN Accelerator classifier. And here we have triggers probes. So we remember in the first video with the IP camera, I could have just added identity. But now I want to use patterns. So we're going to come in here, look for horizontal pattern. Add that pattern. Now, one thing to keep in mind of are 4 phases of discovery. Port scan, classify, identify, explore. You see by default the horizontal pattern comes out with exploration. We want to change that phase to identification. Because remember, patterns do 2 jobs in one basically. They get all the identifying information, as we saw here, getting the keys to what we want to discover. And then it also does the exploration piece. So we want to add that in identification so it gets triggered once we meet this class. So we've added that horizontal probe. We almost forgot to call our pattern, right? That's important, don't you think? LAN Accelerator, it's in the identification phase. When we see this SNMP system OID, we will trigger this horizontal pattern, which calls obviously that pattern, and away we go with discovery. So we're going to go back to discovery here, and we'll do a quick schedule against our device. And as we wait for this paint to dry, I just want to take a minute to recognize, Ryan Zulli, as we all know and love in discovery. He wrote the original probes and sensors for this riverbed. And Patrick DiCarlo, who actually wrote his own pattern and update set for this. I used his as a guide, but those 2 are the genesis of this work. I just wanted to put it in video, like I did that IP camera one, hopefully to help get some good information out there on how to build these out yourself. Alright, so we see our pattern went, and we then classified it, triggered our right classification, went into the WAN Accelerator pattern, did its thing, check our logs, everything looks good, exploring pattern. We have our log here if we want to see it, but no errors, it did it. And we look at our CI, and there's our WAN Accelerator, just as we built. So there's our manufacturer and model, serial number, name, version, IP address, and here's our network adapters and our serial numbers, just like we set up. Alright, well, hopefully this was helpful, and it definitely takes some training if you haven't already with discovery and service mapping. I always recommend the service mapping training because you really get into in-depth in patterns. That's really information that's transferable over to hardware patterns if you ever need to extend them. Keep an eye out on those secret classes and tables like the pre-post processing scripts, knowing that you can utilize this to manipulate and manage your data after it gets processed. So these come in really handy and give you a lot of power over the data and not be locked into just what the pattern can do. Remember, patterns run on the mid server. There's no concept of glide queries from the mid server and the pattern back to the instance, so you may do some of that work here as well. And then our SACI to pattern list. Remember this as well in our deletion strategy. Those are some of the takeaways that I did. Again, it took me a lot of trial and error to get this just right, but once you get it rolling, just like you do probes and sensors, you can get the next one done even quicker. And remember Doug's theory, there's only one wrong way to do a pattern, and that's the one that doesn't work. But there's 100 good ways to write a pattern that suits your method and your style, the ones that do work. All right, thank you so much, everybody, and enjoy the video.